Welcome to the Dead Pixel Society podcast, the photo imaging industry's leading news source. Here's your host, Gary Pageau. The Dead Pixel Society podcast is brought to you by MediaClip, Advertech Printing, and School Photographers of America.
Hello again and welcome to the Dead Pixel Society podcast. I'm your host, Gary Pageau, and today we're joined by Mark Hommerding, the president of schoolpictures.com. And actually, we're here in the world headquarters, schoolpictures.com, in Ypsilanti, Michigan.
Yes, we are.
Hi, Mark. How are you today?
I'm doing great.
So, Mark, why don't you start out for the people who aren't familiar with your story, describe your long career in the school pictures business.
So I started in the volume business, and I started in 1994 working for a company called Jolesch Photography in Des Moines, Iowa. Mm-hmm. And for years I worked with them, and we from there he sold the company to Herff Jones, their photography division, mm-hmm. and we were there for 15 months, and then the Herff Jones photography division sold to Lifetouch, mm-hmm. and then I was with them for about 9 years, I think, mm-hmm. and then I came here.
So talk a little bit about the Jolesch kind of business model, because you weren't really shooting, really. What were you doing there?
So I was hired as a production manager, but Mark's company was, and still is, the best marching band contest photography company in the world, mm-hmm. in the history of the world. Let's even go even more. So I would photograph each weekend, photographing bands, and then we'd take care of the production work afterwards. And then gradually I moved into managing kind of the local business, the graduations, the proms, mm-hmm. That kind of stuff. And then I managed a studio for 5 years where I did seniors and mm-hmm. weddings, and then came back to do more of the college graduation work, mm-hmm. And that's how that went. So I was there for a long time.
And then you moved into Herff Jones, and really you just kind of had a time for a cup of coffee there before yes. Lifetouch came in, and during that big consolidation wave of, the early 2000s that was?
Well, when we joined Herff Jones, I'm going to guess 2006 or 7-ish. I don't remember the timeline exactly, but mm-hmm. We had worked with them for a while, trying to convince them that they needed to be more in the graduation business for profit as opposed to just as a service item. Mm-hmm. And so we started partnering with them, and then they liked our business model, and so they purchased the company from Mark and his partner Birch.
Mm-hmm. And then Herff Jones then, of course, was purchased by Lifetouch.
Correct.
What was your role at Lifetouch then? Because it wasn't doing production. What were you doing then for Lifetouch?
So when Lifetouch acquired Herff Jones, the Jolesch photography part was kind of an odd man out. It was not in their normal course of what they were used to. Mm-hmm. So I went up to the headquarters and talked to them about, hey, you might want to consider photographing graduations more seriously, and the line I used was, down at Jolesch Photography in Des Moines, Iowa, we feasted on the crumbs that you guys didn't want to eat. Mm-hmm. And so at the time, their senior director of marketing, his name was Orrin Welch. His name still is Orrin Welch. He's still in the business.
Yes, I know Orrin very well.
Yeah, and he came down to Des Moines, saw what we were doing, and was interested in having us launch that. So there was a test pilot in some territories. I was involved in that, and my job was to help the business grow in commencements nationwide, and then within our territory in Des Moines, it was to concentrate on the college market. Okay.
And how successful was that during that early period?
Well, we went from from no business to some significant amount of business. Mm-hmm. The high school side, by the end, we were doing 3,000 graduations at the high school side, and mm-hmm. and the business that I was managing, we tripled in the course of about 9 years in mm-hmm. terms of the college side.
Okay, so significant growth, one would say.
Yes.
Okay.
I like to grow.
Growth is going to be a topic we're going to be coming back to a lot, I think.
Okay.
So when did you leave Lifetouch? You said you were there about 9 years, and what precipitated that change?
So in the fall of 2019, I had my a second presentation to senior management, 2 years to invest in the product line, and commencements was not near the top of the list, right? So if they're going to choose to invest, they're going to invest in the things that are going to bring the most return for the dollar, so underclass or seniors or yearbooks. And I realized that it's probably not going to, I've reached the limit of what I'm going to do here.
Right.
And so I started thinking about what I wanted to do next. And in roughly January, February of 2020, I decided it's time for me to look for other opportunities right before the pandemic, right? Didn't know that was coming.
Well, no one saw that one coming.
Yeah.
So what was your plan then? Was it a specific company? Was it inside the industry, inside the industry, outside the industry? You're going through a process where where most people are looking at, hey, I'm not going to start something new.
Yeah, so my thing is that when you consider your career, each career move you make is about a 5 to 7 year commitment, and then you should be looking for what's next on the horizon. So I'm thinking, mid-50s, I've got one real career move left, and if I don't make it now, it'll be too late for me to make it.
Right.
So at the time, I had 5 options on the table. One was get out of the business entirely, right? And 2 was stick it out. 3 was start my own business, and 4 and 5 were to actually 4, 5, and 6 were to partner with various people within the industry that I had been talking to. And I pretty early decided that I probably did not want to leave the business because I had a pretty good sized Rolodex. And so I didn't want to just leave that behind because that had value. I thought about starting my own business and knew that I was a good growth person, but maybe not a good builder. It's the difference between, say, writing and editing.
Right.
And so in this case, I started talking with people I wanted to partner with, and one is I called up my friend Skip and said, hey, would you consider working together? And he was looking for an opportunity himself, and so he said, yes, but I need you to come out here and to view the place. And I said, well, why? And he goes, well, you'll know when you get here, and as you know, because you've toured the building, it's a pretty impressive facility.
So for those who don't know Skip, talk a little bit about Skip and what he's built here in Ypsilanti.
Sure, and straight up, I could never have built this business, right? And to Skip's credit, he recognized he couldn't grow any further. If he could have, he would have already done it. So he started in 1978 and founded American Photo Marketing, and he was involved with colleges, graduations. He was involved in high school senior class groups plus graduations, and then he was also involved in Greek sorority stuff.
Right.
And so he got involved in school pictures around 2004-ish, I think, 2005. I know he and I were talking at a PSPA when I was starting to get Jolesch photography involved with the underclass, and we had just stayed in touch. So he had built a very nice business here, and yeah, he had a heck of a run. So
specifically, talk a little bit about the facility here, because I think that's kind of got an interesting little story in it.
Yeah. So Skip had grown out of his old facility, and he was looking to expand, and he was like, okay, I need it to be relatively near an airport for travel. I need it to be relatively near some major highways to get the photographers on and off the road. And he was looking around the area we're in right now. And this facility used to be owned by Ave Maria College, and they had let it go. And so it's a former school, a former primary school, and a superintendent's office, and that's the buildings we're in right now.
So it's kind of interesting. You've got a school photography company in a school building.
That's correct. Yeah.
It does kind of still have that feel, although there's been massive renovations over the years.
Yes.
So tell me about the conversations you had with Skip to come into the business.
So I flew out here the first Saturday in March, and we toured the building.
Of 2020.
Of 2020.
During the pandemic.
Right before.
Okay.
So 3 days later, the Wednesday later, was when it all heck broke loose, and by the end of the week I was calling them up, and anyway, but I can come back to that. But I toured the building, and I had various questions like, who are your best photographers? Well, I have a photography manager, but I'm not really familiar with that. And well, who are your salespeople, and what are your top 10 prospects? What's your cost of acquisition? He goes, well, I'm not really familiar with that. And afterwards, we went out to dinner, and he said, what impressed you most? And I'd seen the room where he prints all the ID cards. And we had all these, he had all these printers. And I said, what's the cost of you printing an ID card? And we went over the cost structure, and I said, I you could have said any number and I wouldn't have known. He really had a handle on the operations side of it, and I really had I would say a handle on what I would call the B2B side of it, the making sure that I was able to get and retain clients, and also making sure I could execute on the photography end. So I got in the business through photography, and so we had complementary skill sets, and so then we realized, hey, this could be something good.
So you've worked out an arrangement where you're now the president of the business, and Skip is still involved.
We talk every day. So he's a good guy, and here's the thing: I knew I was getting a business partner, but I got a benefit. I also got a friend, and I wasn't expecting that. I don't think he was either, and that's just been a really wonderful thing for us both.
Good. So, but then you come in, and this even though Skip is still involved, it's still your baby.
Yes.
So when did you actually physically move here in the middle of a pandemic?
So I started in October of 2020.
Right.
And then we became partners. Well, it was like we intended to do all the paperwork, but we didn't sign anything and become officially partners until the end of the year. So the new company started on January 1st of 2021.
And as I recall, just because I happened to be here around that time, there was some overlap between Skip being here before he moved and you being here. So that must have been a nice training period.
It was great. So, we have this house right next door that I live in, and Skip and I were both living there, and every day I would, at 5 o'clock go on over there and we'd talk all night about, these aspects of the various business and what strategic decisions we needed to make and what we needed to do going forward.
So what were some of those things you had to do going forward? Just for the folks who haven't been able to tour the building yet, you've got some production on site, and you've got some overhead here.
Yes, a significant amount of overhead. And there's times where I'll talk about we need to managing the overhead is a tough part of the business. So, but for me, coming in here, the first and foremost thing was we needed to have more of a sales effort. So I went around actually, and for the first 90 days, a lot of it was just observation. And hey, what's going on here? Asking a lot of questions, trying to learn. I'm natively more involved in commencement photography than I am in school pictures. So I was just kind of learning kind of what the tripping points were in that industry as well. And for me, it was ask everybody kind of what you think is going on here. So I used questions that I got from the book The First 90 Days and from Marcus Cunningham's First Break All the Rules. The other one was a book called The First 90 Days, which is kind of the standard in the industry. And the third area for questions I mined from a company called Manager Tools. I've listened to their podcast for 15 years, and shout out to them. They've helped me make my career what it is today. Anyway, so those three areas, I just asked everybody the same questions. So what I was doing was going around and talking to all employees, hey, what's going on here? What do you think's working well? What do you think needs to improve? And there were a number of suggestions, but one of the ones that I knew I could affect right away was, hey, we need to have a more robust sales effort and help with that. So that was the first thing I needed to know.
So on a sales effort, though, you get a lot of top line growth, and you've had, so you can kind of illustrate maybe in a percentage how much growth you've had.
Yeah, on the school picture side, we've had about 30% growth. So maybe a little bit more. I'm not sure the exact numbers. In terms of number of accounts, so we've also had some growth because we've raised prices and restructured things. But on just number of people we photographed, that's grown by 30% in the last 2 years. We've grown a lot on the commencement side, but that's been more due to acquisition and old clients looking me up and saying, hey, I would like to come still work with you.
Because you got that big fat Rolodex you were telling me about.
Correct.
So, but with growth comes increases in other things like overhead and expenses and things like that. So how have you managed like the cash flow side of the business on that?
Okay, so the cash flow side is, I think that's the roughest part, because you've got to, especially for me, so I'm used to budgeting, but I was not used to managing cash flow. And that's where actually Skip has helped me a lot. So there's another woman who works here, Lorraine. She's been very valuable in kind of coaching me in terms of, hey, this is what's coming up and that kind of thing. So. But when you make a lot of change, that change in and of itself is work. right? So we've had to put in some new systems to account for the growth. That change in and of itself has worked. So you have more labor assigned to a task than you might necessarily have in the future.
Right.
So there's a lot of, I call it investment in the future company by doubling down on some things. So for instance, going into this past spring when we knew we were going to grow by a lot in graduations, about 300%, we started hiring people early and having them on staff gearing up, and that was not labor that we should have had in a normal year, but we wanted to have it in preparation for this past spring.
Right, because you anticipated to bring them on board and in the way you wanted to do things and to train them in the procedures that you wanted. It was going to take extra time, which means more.
Yeah, and the people who've been here for a while, they've been tremendous. So I'll just give a couple examples, like say Crystal or Tony or Sean. Those people have been here a long time, and they knew the business well enough to help the new people learn the systems and get in place and do better. Now the thing is that as you add more people, that last person in knows the business the least.
Right.
So you have that quality issue with that last person that you don't with, say, Sean putting together graduation, who's actually been to them and photographed them, or Tony, who's been to graduations and now he's in charge of getting the flyers printed, or Crystal in terms of the matching. You know, those people are really key to making sure that the business remains successful.
So as you've grown, how did the roles change? For example, you came into an existing operation, like you said, and you have established staff of how many people approximately?
Well, right now we got 40-ish, but when I got here there was probably 20-ish.
Yeah. So you've grown the staff.
Yeah.
And so, sales are great, but you've got more overhead.
Yes.
And then you've also had to restructure the business.
Yes.
Can you talk a little bit about the restructuring you just had?
Sure.
That is to drive the operations and the sales into future growth.
Sure. So what I did was I just started to think conceptually about kind of where things are in the value chain. So the first part of the value chain is what I call the B2B part. And that includes your sales, that includes your photo, that includes anybody that's going to touch a client, which is different from a customer. To me, a client is a school, where the customer is the person who's purchasing the photo in the end. Right. So that first part, that B2B part, was where I felt like I needed to concentrate a lot when I got here, on improving photo quality and also on the sales effort.
Right.
The middle section of the value chain is the operational area, and that's where we had a team that was very good at managing the volume that we had. And then the last part of the value chain is the manufacturing part. And that's where, that would be your equivalent of, say, Allkit, which is one of my suppliers, or Candid Color Systems, which was one of my suppliers. Those folks are the printing aspect. But we also have that here. So we've got all three parts of the value chain. And so when, at my Lifetouch territory, it was just the B2B side. A typical school picture company will have the first two parts of the value chain. They'll have the B2B side and the operational side, and they'll export all their manufacturing to an external lab. And so we had all three. So I had to conceptually think about that, and then I organized the groups into basically two teams originally, external and internal, right? And the external was the sales and the photo, and the internal was everything else. And now we had another restructuring. And at the time when I did that in January of 2021, I said, my experience is you want to restructure about every 18 months to 2 years, just so you don't get cobwebs, and you start to rethink about what you need to do in terms of your business to move it forward. So you want your structure to serve the business you're working in.
Right.
And so what I did was, we now made all of operations one unit, where it used to be two different areas, and then manufacturing, it's kind of its own thing now, because they bring a unique value to us that other companies can't compete against.
Right. I mean, for example, you can respond quickly to retakes and reorders and things like that.
Yeah, and the example I gave, we were talking about earlier, was we had an issue where we produce our own yearbooks in-house, and we had a client call where they had a mix-up in some yearbooks for some identical twins. And we had those printed out within a day and delivered to the school the next morning.
Which, from a customer service standpoint, is huge, because you responded right away.
We rebooked the school.
Yeah.
So, good job, Brandy, by the way, in case you're listening to this.
And that's one of the things that when I talk to school photography companies, that's really been an adjustment for them in the kind of the post-COVID world, is they're becoming much more in contact with customers and the end users than they used to have. And the expectation in that world is, I'm not waiting 5 weeks for my pictures.
Yes.
I need everything, next. Why can't I have this sooner? So you're well positioned for that.
Well, yes, and the other thing that's key is the market is a differentiated marketplace, right? And the way that we differentiate from our competition is through that aspect of it. Like I love when we have clients come here and tour the building. These are the people who are going to design your yearbook. Here's the people who are going to print your yearbook. Here's where I sit. So that that I'm right around the corner and can take care of this for you in a heartbeat.
But how are you going to do that as you continue to grow? Let's say you grow 30% every year. You're going to spend all your time doing tours.
I will accept that problem gladly. I will have as many tours because every time I bring somebody here, I can brag about the company and the people that are here.
Right.
In the end, it's not the walls that matter; it's the people that are inside of them.
So going forward, what are some of the opportunities you see for schoolpictures.com and the industry? Because I think we're kind of at an inflection point for this segment of the industry in that it's now becoming more of a full-featured supplier almost.
Yes.
As opposed to, we're just that school picture company. I mean, there are volume photography companies who are getting into graphics and they're doing the entire corporate identity for schools. Yep. I'm not saying you're going to do that, but obviously you're very plugged in the industry. You're seeing some of these things and it's almost like it's a blue sky type environment.
Yes. For me right now, my blue ocean right now is digital ID cards. And the reason is just it's a hard thing to implement. We know because we've done it. It's complex if you're doing it well. Let's put it that way. And I just see I haven't had a paper ticket to go on an airplane in 10, 15 years.
Right.
I don't ever expect to have one. There's an issue with when a school has a crisis. We had one recently here at Oxford. I don't know if you remember. Oxford High School nearby.
That's one of your schools?
Yeah, for graduations, not for the school pictures. But that graduation was actually kind of tough for my crew to sit through, right? But they had the situation where when they had the school shooting, all the kids ran down the hill to the local, I think it was a Meijer or Kroger or something, and they closed the store, and the police came on by and said, hey, show me your ID. Well, I don't have it. It's upstairs in my book bag, but I have my ID, or I have my phone. And that was the turning point for me. It's like every kid's got a phone.
Right.
Now, I know that some don't, but we can print those out. So there's a few high schools that we're doing this at that are very engaged, and that to me is something that I'm looking at. I'm also looking at just making sure I'm as vertically integrated as I can be. So we took all of sports inside, right? We use Blueprint to manage the sales, but now we do all the shipping and printing right here, and we're turning those things around in 48 hours. So mom orders a picture, it's leaving here from this building, just going down the road as opposed to leaving from a national lab and taking 3 days later, but we can correct that stuff on the fly. So for me, ability to be customer and client focused is better than ever.
And digital enables a lot of those opportunities,
Yes,
but
absolutely.
people still want the physical print. That's what...
Correct. Correct. People still want those dead pixels, Gary.
Well, it is interesting how digital technology has enabled actually the production of more dead pixels in much more variety of ways. I mean, just walking through a facility here, you have a big big sublimation area. You do plaques. You do, ink on paper. You don't do any silver halide here, but I'm sure you have people for that.
We have some e-surface stuff, and we have press, and we have sublimation, and we got the engraving area. We don't need to go to, with the exception of kind of the vinyl banners that you'll see up for sports. That's the only thing really that we have to export well, and also large 40 by 50 prints. We don't have that, but we could do everything else in-house if we choose to do so.
Well, great. Well, thank you very much, Mark, for your time, and looking forward to seeing more future growth from schoolpictures.com.
Great. Thanks, Gary.
Thank you for listening to the Dead Pixel Society podcast. Read more great stories and sign up for the newsletter at www.thedeadpixelssociety.com.